Yes, welcome to the marvellous, wonderful and fantastic, interesting, exciting world of Big Willies. Okay, right, so why should a sensible cognitive scientist like myself have an interest in this topic? Well, I am a cognitive scientist who's fascinated by the unconscious and what the brain does. So, the brain does weird things to us. Look at that. A and B, they're the same colour. They're not out. Oh yes, they are. Look, you can do that, show they're the same colour. Because our brain is always automatically doing things without us knowing them. But the thing is, as soon as you mention the word unconscious, people always jump to the conclusion that you're going to talk about Uncle Sigmund. And I'm not, because he had this idea, he had this conscious mind that would see things in a literal way, but you'd have this subconscious mind that would view things in a much more sexual way. And yeah, it's not true, so let's just get rid of Uncle Sigmund. So me as a cognitive scientist, my view is very much based on evolution. And our brain does stuff that we evolved to do because it gave us an evolutionary advantage. So why would we have this unconsciousness thing? Well, imagine our predecessors somewhere in the wilds, wandering around, there's a rustle in the bushes, and out pops something, and this time they run away, and that's fine, okay, they escape. So what does their brain have to do next time to keep them alive when they're out in the wild and those bushes start rustling again? Well, what it has to do is it has to do something very quickly, it has to do it automatically, has to do it in a way where we don't have to be aware of everything that's going on, and this is why we get the idea of intuition. And all you have to do is get the idea that it's scary, run away, and you survive. If you don't do that, you don't survive, don't pass on your genes, and you don't evolve. So that is this kind of world. I mean, it's sort of really talking about this thing which is de rigueur now called behavioural economics, if anybody knows about that. In Harvard, where we do have this way that we can think and decide and reason our way through problems, but actually our behaviour is way more based on what are called heuristics, these mental shortcuts that drive our behaviour that we're not necessarily aware of. And this kind of allows us to do funny things. Our brain does weird things with us. So, for example, I did my PhD partly in something called the mere exposure effect, which means as you're exposed to something, over time, the more you get exposed to it, the more you like it, and the brain goes, oh, that's fun, that's fun, that's fun, and then I get bored with it, and it all goes away, and your emotional response increases and decreases. So I like to put a few little hints in my talks. So if you are single and there's somebody out there that you really, really fancy, try exposing yourself to them 8 times before asking out on a date. There's also, always gets a laugh, there's also some other things like weird things like nominative determinism. We're attracted to words that are optimally familiar to us. So we like things like our names. There are more dentists called Dennis and Denise than there should be by chance alone. So here's a few examples that I quite like, which are quite fun. Like there's a lawyer from California called Suyu. There's a footballer who is called Mark Deman. It's a cheat because she's Russian, but a hurdler called Marina Stepanova. But my favourite of all time is, and you can, oh hello.
What is that?
I set it off.
What does that mean? I don't know. Hang on.
Shall I just carry on anyway? You better not. It was a great punchline coming up as well. Urologist. This guy is a urologist there we go. This guy is the urologist in charge of urology, head of urology in Somerset, and he's called Nicholas Burns-Cox. You see, it was great! He got interrupted. Anyway. But this brings us back to Willies. So where does this all come from? So I was finishing my PhD, I was meant to be writing up, I ended up doing kind of crappy jobs in TV for a while, and I was doing some filming on a terrible BBC daytime show with some crappy celebs at the Mandatory Swords. And they were showing us behind the scenes and what went on, and they showed us the place where they repair the waxworks, because sometimes they get damaged. So for example, there was Patrick Moore, if you remember him in the old days, about 20 years ago. And they were mending his head because some bankers had been in the night before for a big piss-up, and basically they just wanted a game of football and decided to use poor Patrick's head as the football. But I was fascinated by the waxwork at Madame Tussauds that got damaged the most often. And it was in like every 6 weeks or so. And you think it would be somebody like an evil dictator, or like an evil dictator, or some kind of like, annoying soap opera stars, or maybe just one of those terrible plastic celebrities who's probably less real than the actual Maxwell. But no, it was one of Britain's greatest athletes, Linford Christie. Because the one thing that people couldn't resist doing, even though there was someone saying, don't touch the waxworks, was leaning over. I mean, Linford was like a brilliant athlete, but he was also known because he had a rather large package. And people couldn't resist leaning in and having a little squeeze. Couldn't resist it. Anyway, but this triggered me, because I knew the kind of idea that, Linford Christie is obviously a black guy, and there's this idea that black guys have big willies. And this reminded me of a talk I went to when I was undergrad by a very clever psychologist called Leon Kamin. So a lot of this work I've done is based on his work. And he wanted to investigate this idea of this kind of race and willy size. So if you look on the internet now, you can find lots of different information, lots of information about it. Because this is average willy size across Europe. As you can see, the British are kind of fairly average, the French doing quite well, but you have these weird anomalies, like you've got the Hungarians having the largest and the Romanians having the smallest. So do we imagine that there are hordes of Romanian women looking at the border of Hungary longingly? Probably not, because this is all, the problem with this, and this is what Leon Kamin recognises, that all these data are self-report. Some normally top shelf magazines saying, hey lads, go and have a quick measure in the loos and go and tell us what you think. And of course that's not a very good way of doing it, because they're all self-selecting, they're all nominating themselves to be in it. There's kind of no standardised way of actually measuring your willy, unless you using US patent 7147609, which uses Archimedes' principle for some reason, though I don't know how that works. It must be up that way rather than that way. I don't know what happens. Anyway, but what you need, and not the NCAM recognises, what you need is, for a proper scientific study, is you need to have lots of men in the same place at the same time, and from lots of different races, lots of different backgrounds. You need to have some sort of hierarchical structure, so people are forced to do this rather than actually self-nominate, which could be a problem. A scientist or medical person involved who can actually take the measurements, and a shitload of time on your hands, because there's far better things to do than measure penis size. And he only found this once. There'd only been one study in the time he was doing this, and this was in 1889, and it was the French Foreign Legion. For some reason, they liked each other's choppers. Sorry, that was the knob gag. I'm going to take it away. But the reason of this study, of doing this study, and the outcome was, it was actually rather interesting. Because what it did was it blew, he found it sort of blew this idea out of the water. There's lots of kind of myths about penis size, like something to do with sort of, thumb size, it's nothing to do with that, or hand span, or like index finger and thumb, it's nothing to do with those. It's also nothing to do with foot size. They took lots of different measures in this study. That's kind of bad news for clowns, obviously. And also, even things like deep voices, there's nothing to do with the deep voice. I mean, Aristotle thought that. Aristotle thought that your genitals were attached to your vocal cords, and when they dropped, it stretched your vocal cords. That's why your voice got deeper. Anyway, but that's not true. And also, importantly, it proved that actually there's no correlation between penis size and ethnicity. And this was the reason why I looked at this, and this is why this is actually, now it gets serious and an important point, amongst all the frippery, is actually, this is why Linford Christie used to hate and was very offended by this, people commenting about his penis size, because it comes from a very dark place, very bad place, because it comes from the slave trade. Because what happened was that all the slave traders were actually, of course, good religious men, and they would never enslave another human being, because that would be against God, But actually, so they got around this mentally by saying, what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that these people aren't actually people, that they're animals, and we can bestialise them. And if we bestialise them, then it's all okay. So they turned them into these ideas that they were animalistic, they were more rapacious, they had much greater libidos than kind of others, and of course this meant that they had large genitals, which kind of doesn't really follow. But this is the kind of logic that they had, hence the reason it's actually quite offensive to say that. So he looked into some other kind of information as well, and he came up with some other stuff, like back in the day when the Europeans were going around the world doing terrible things, they got to know the indigenous people, and eventually when they learned how to communicate, these kind of people said, you never guess what we used to think, right? We couldn't work out why you wore those trousers things. Why were you wearing those trousers things? And we thought, right, you were wearing them because your willies are so big, they were wrapped around 3 times, you had to tuck them all in. So they thought this about the white man as well. And he sort of hypothesised that there must be something to do, some weird heuristic, this kind of big woolly heuristic that I'm sort of thinking about. And he kind of looked at some other stuff and hypothesised that you can kind of do an experiment where you've got big muscly guys, and if you've got a big muscly guy projected on the wall, and he gets bigger and stronger and handsomer as you get closer to him, and he's like, it's really good. And the same with the kind of Afro-Caribbean guy, he gets bigger, stronger and more handsome, but he also gets scarier. And Leo came and suggested that perhaps there was this weird idea that if it's scary, it's got a big willy. And this sort of makes sense anecdotally, because if you think about it, the guy at the office is always shouting and stamping around. Oh, he's compensating for having a small willy, because actually he's scary, and you might think he's got a big one, so using a bit of reverse psychology. Big car, small, tiny dick. Same difference. In America, guns are like penis substitutes because people think they're scary, and they are bloody scary. And of course, there are plenty of cases when you find people who actually do think the other way around. But what I like about this, you're lucky I don't show the Donald Trump one tonight, I tell you. That's even worse. But the interesting thing as well is you can trace this back through history. So if it's this endemic thing in our psyche, we should find it in history as well, and we do. Take Priapus, the Greek god, who was a Greek god of big willies and some fruit, not all fruit, just some fruit. And you know, he was depicted as being a scary character. So if you stole fruit from his garden, if you were a man, he would sodomize you. If you were a woman, he would futter over you. You can look that word up. And if you were a man with a beard, there's a big long list of things he would do. So clearly, Priapus fancied men with beards. Hipsters beware. So, and again, you can even look back to like the Stone Age, and there were things like these, hand axes. The one on the right is totally unusable. But again, we have this kind of psyche of sort of big thing equals better. And of course, I'm sure there were people around there saying, oh, willy size, etc. And even there's this thing, the earliest depiction of the penis is this thing called the whole phallus, which was about 30,000 years old and found in Germany. And I love archaeology, I love archaeologists, but they've got no sense of humour. I mean, they say it's a religious thing, it's a votive thing, it has even suggestions it was a dildo that was used in the Ice Age. A stone dildo in the Ice Age doesn't even bear thinking about. I would like to think that any good unreconstructed male, like they would today, would find a big woolly-shaped rock, stick it down their trousers and scare their friends. I mean, they must have been doing that as well. Anyway, so all of this is kind of, nobody had really done proper research into this kind of heuristic until Muggins came along. I happen to have a friend who runs the country's only academic conference about the Archers. Now, I don't know if any of you are Archers fans, but I was unaware, because I'm not, that if you're an Archers fan, the one thing you don't talk about is what the Archers look like. You don't talk about their physical attributes whatsoever. So we thought it would be fun to say, okay, well, let's see if this holds true. If we work out if the scariest archer is the one, and there's any correlation between the two. And this actually made the front page of the Radio 4's kind of Archers page, which I'm quite pleased about. But we did this test, we've got all these characters, and we said, okay, who's the scariest, who's the most intimidating, who's the most frightening if you met them on a dark night, and what are their willy sizes? And we've got this bonkers correlation of this ridiculous kind of, Jazza apparently has got a big willy. That's fine, I don't know why I don't listen. Anyway, but yes, so this weird kind of quirk. So actually this is kind of the first evidence that has ever been shown that this kind of weird, big willy heuristic, this sort of shortcut we have, is actually true. So I've been doing this talk for about 5 years, and everything I said was true. And up 3 years ago, this proper academic journal study came out about willy size. So I'm like, hey, let's go and find out what we can find out about it. And they plotted willy size. About 13,000 people were involved. So that's basically the kind of the distribution of willy size around the world. So ladies, holidays, South America. There's probably still a bit of politics in there because the smallest willies in the world are the North Koreans, and I'm quite bloody scared of them, put it that way. But my little brain went, okay, well this is the real data. This is done by proper scientists in a peer-reviewed academic journal. I've got the self-report data. How accurate are men when they measure their willy size compared to the real data? So I did a little study, a little comparison. And believe it or not, actually, men are really, really rather accurate when we do it. Our Belgian friends are in, notice that actually even a little bit modest. We would like to say that there are many, many things wrong with this country, but when a gentleman from Britain is asked to go into a loo and measure his own penis size, he reports it 100% accurately. My God, we've got little to be proud of, but we can be proud of that. Anyway, so I sort of laughed profusely when I found this and thought, actually, blimmin' heck, this is kind of like, wow, men actually do report their penis size accurately. Except if you're French. French, massive liars! Monsieur the French, you're busted! Only people in Europe who lie about their willy size. Anyway, so the big question is, though, does it actually matter? Does it really matter if, what your willy size is? Well, again, it wasn't that long ago, so actually after I started doing this talk, a bunch of fun-loving Australians decided they'd go and find out. So they created a bunch of avatars and showed women on screen, and they got them to kind of rate how attractive they were, and they basically decided to manipulate things like shoulder length and hip size, shoulder to hip ratio, height, and willy size. And basically they found that the guy on the right is by far the most attractive, and it's 80% due to height and hip size, shoulder to hip ratio. Broad shoulders, skinny hips, sorts you out, that's the most attractive thing. If then your willy gets a bit bigger, that sort of has a little effect afterwards as well. But I'm afraid to say, if you're the guy on the left and you've got a fat bum, it doesn't matter how big a willy gets. Nobody's interested. It doesn't matter. So, summing all this up, because I'm just about on time. So, what have we learned? Kind of don't trust the French to talk about their penises. And more to the point, if you're the kind of person who really does find that their willy size is something that worries them, and they're worried about impressing people, and you want to do something about it, buy shoulder pads, not a dick pump. Thank you.